Can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself before we begin?
Yeah, okay. I'm Rohit Chakravarty. I study bats. I'm a bat researcher. I currently work with Nature Conservation Foundation, which is a Mysore-based organization, Bangalore Mysore-based organization. And I also work with Bat Conservation International, which is based in the US. And through these organizations, I lead conservation projects on bats all across the country. And we work on different topics related to how anthropogenic situations create problems for bats. We study them and wherever possible, we try to intervene.
How long have you been studying bats?
I have been studying bats since 2012. Yeah, so around 12 years now. My first formal project was my master's project in 2013-14. And since then, there's been no looking back.
Nice. So we're going to focus on bat natural history in the first section. So if you can tell us what in the life of a bat is like.
Okay. Again, right now, the first thing that we need to know about bats is more
Yes,
than.
I'm so sorry about, yeah,
Go ahead.
yes. I shouldn't generalize and just say
Oh,
bat.
that's okay.
Yeah, I think
I can clarify
let
that.
me take a step, let me take a step back and ask you first, how many species of bats are there in India?
Oh, okay. Before I answer, so I don't know if it's your
Did
internet
you?
or mine, but whenever you ask
It
me
was
questions,
mine.
okay. But in this case, I understood the
Okay.
question, but maybe at some point I'll have to ask you to repeat. In India, there are 134 species of bats, and all over the world there are over 1,400 species. But the good thing is that we don't know enough about too many species, so we can casually generalize and assume that most bats behave the same way for the sake of this interview.
And of these 134, how many have you added to the tally?
Wait, so you mean through discovering new species?
Like new for India?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I have actually only added one new species to India's checklist so far, but hopefully we're working on a couple of papers and hopefully there will be at least a couple more bats being added to India's checklist soon.
Was this the one in Meghalaya? What was it? The one from Meghalaya, right? 2021, I
Uh,
think.
2020. No, that was from Uttarakhand. Yes,
Oh,
2020. Yeah. I caught it in 2016, 17, and the paper came out in 2020.
Rohit, I think his.
Yeah, he's frozen. Now he's
yeah.
back.
Just give me 1 second. Let me just see if I can fix it.
Yeah.
So, in the meantime, I just wanted to ask you: is there a ritual naming it after the person who discovered it or something?
No, not quite. Actually, people who discover a species, I think the rule is that you can't name it after yourself.
Okay.
Probably that is the only rule. Like
Uh,
you can name it after pretty much everything, like starting from your toothpaste to
oh.
aunt to some random made up name. But I think the only rule is that you can't name it after yourself.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Oh.
But I think there are rough guidelines about how you should go about it as well. Like it has to be an informative name and should tell you something about the species and all of that. But yeah. So of these 134, how many do you think are really common? Like in any given area, if you go out at night, what is the average number of species that you will encounter?
So in most places, let's take cities as an example. In most cities where I have recorded bats, in say about 15 to 20 minutes of recording, you can easily get 6 to 7 species of bats in most cities in India, standing at your terrace. And of course, once you record more and more often, either from your terrace or from other areas in the city, most Indian cities, I think, should have somewhere between 10 to 20 species.
Okay, and by record, you mean how?
Yeah, by recording, so by recording, what I mean is I use an instrument called a bat detector. It's just a fancy way of saying it's an ultrasonic recorder. So it's a device that records in the ultrasonic range. And and bats, as they constantly keep producing ultrasound, which is used for navigation, which is used for hunting, which they also often use for some sort of communication between them. So the calls that they use for navigation, which are called echolocation calls, those turn out to be species specific. So different species often have different acoustic call signatures. Of course, there's some overlap between certain species, but a lot of species tend to have their characteristic echolocation call signatures. And once you've recorded these calls, even a bat flying 10, 15 meters above your head, which looks like a tiny black speck in the sky, can be identified after you've recorded its call.
But you've also recorded some calls for the first time in the world, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And then you caught the bat and ID'd it?
Yes. So
Okay.
so that's what I was doing in Uttarakhand in 2016 and 17, where the project was about doing a survey of bats, which means that, of course, these are animals that are flying in the night, so you have to put a net to catch them. We were catching them with the help of nets, and the second objective was to create what is called a call library of these bats. So when these bats got caught in the nets, we identified them in the hand, and after I finished identifying, taking measurements, taking samples for genetic analysis, etc., we released these bats, and an observer would stand, say, about 10, 15 meters away. And as the bat is flying, the moment it takes off, it starts echolocating, and that gets recorded onto the device, which is unlike watching birds where you can see the bird, you can see it singing its heart out, and then you record. You have to go through a whole tamasha to record bat calls.
Nice, very interesting. So now I think we can go to what it's like to be a bat.
Okay. Well, the philosophical answer to this is probably that you will never know, which Thomas
No,
Nagel.
but I think we're starting to know.
Of course, of course. No, I was just starting on a very boring note, but the day or the night in the life of a bat is quite exciting. So, for example, so the first 15, 20 minutes, now this is the time at dusk when birds start to fall asleep. Right at dusk, bats become active and they've been sleeping throughout the day. Actually, a lot of times they don't even sleep throughout the day, even inside the roost where individuals sleep. They typically sleep in cities, it could be anywhere. So even a tiny crevice in your house, the pipeline behind your on running along your wall, all of these are very conducive places for bats to live in, or trees in the neighborhood. There's a lot of bickering that goes on at a time when they're supposed to be sleeping. So what I don't know is whether they truly sleep or not, or how long they sleep. So once they're awake, the first thing that they want is water because they're extremely thirsty. And that's also something we know when we put our nets out to catch bats. The first 15 to 20 minutes tend to be a little busy because bats come out to drink water. So they go out, they drink water. Once they've quenched their thirst, insect-eating bats try to hunt a few insects because insect activity is also quite high, like moths start to fly out during that time. So insect activity is quite high. They get their fill of water, they get their fill of insects, and for the first hour or so after dusk is dedicated completely to eating. After that, it becomes like an afternoon for bats, so the activity drops again. And this is the time when they when they take a bit of a rest in either in another shelter, which is often different from the place where they sleep. They go to another place which is called the night roost, and that is where they rest for a bit. Or bats that tend to hunt slightly larger insects or slightly larger animals, they take those animals to that night roost and chew them at peace. So that happens in the afternoon, which is midnight for bats. And again, around 3, 4 in the morning is when there's again a sudden burst of activity where bats start feeding once again, start drinking water once again. And as soon as dawn hits, bats are back to their roost. But actually, to be honest, the day doesn't end there. So what I've just described is only the time when they are active and away from their sleeping area. But like I was saying, even while they're in their sleeping area, the roost, there's still a lot of social communication that goes on. And in fact, most of the mating, most of courtship, everything happens in the roost. So the roost is as important to a bat as the rest of its foraging environment. So a lot of social, like a lot of singing often happens, or any kind of communication that builds social bonds, that happens in the roost, and mating happens in the roost, and friendships are formed in the roost as well. Yeah, that's the life of.
Amazing. I'm going to ask you to explain all of that, how all of that happens. But first, where are they drinking water from?
They drink water mostly from any source of water will do. In cities, it could be anything starting from a sewage pipeline to a proper lake. In the forest, of course, the sources are endless. A small puddle of water, a semi-perennial or a perennial stream would also do. But how they drink water is often quite interesting. Like certain small species of bats, like the insect-eating bats are very agile on the wing, so they just go down, they skim the surface of water. But the larger bats that we are most familiar with, the flying foxes, those are not agile enough. So flying foxes, and this is a great thing to observe for everyone because everybody has flying foxes in their cities. And it's peak summer right now. So you stand next to a lake, you'll see flying foxes come down, and then instead of putting their mouth in the water, they come down and they splash the surface of the water with their belly and or the chest, and then they go to the nearest tree and lick water from the chest or the belly. So that's quite cool to observe in peak summers.
Yeah, yeah. Are they usually going to the same place every day?
Hard to tell, but I would say most species do. And in fact, I think it's a part of all of these factors: safety, sources of water, sources of food are all factors that are somehow determining where they sleep during the day, because they know that once they leave, they want immediate and quick access. So it's us trying to choose a neighborhood where there are quite a few grocery stores in our vicinity.
Okay. Lots of questions here. When you said when they're choosing a roosting site, right? So this is probably after they disperse from where they were born.
Uh-huh.
So who's dispersing? How far are they dispersing? What are their territory sizes?
That's amazing. Okay, I'm getting to think quite a bit now, which is quite different from the other interviews that I've done. So this is cool. A lot of questions. And again, given that we are talking about many different species, every species ends up having its own social structure. So I'll take a couple of examples here. In the case of the short-nosed fruit bat, which is a common species in most of our cities, it's about this big in size, about 10 to 15 centimeters from head to toe. And so that bat lives in harems where there's one male and there are multiple females. So chances are quite high that the females are the ones that disperse, or the male, so female, the actually both sexes. If a female gives birth to the males or females, those pups, after they grow a certain age, they both will probably have to disperse, unless maybe the male will not be will not mate with its offspring. So in that case, both sexes probably disperse. In some others, where the colonies are more female driven, the males are the ones that are the male offspring is the one that is made to disperse. In certain other species, like tomb bats and mouse-tail bats, which are also quite common in archaeological sites and monuments in the north of India, they tend to form, after mating has happened, they tend to form sexually segregated colonies. So the females live in one side, the males live in another side, even in the same cave.
Oh.
And yeah, so once the pups are born, I think then it depends on their gender. If it's a male, then they probably, and I think juveniles also tend to form bachelor groups for a certain amount of time, and probably juvenile males. The juvenile females probably remain with the females. Yeah, so quite variable. And again, the but taking, say, a city, an urban area as an example, you can imagine how much pressure this might put on offspring, because they've grown up in a certain area and now they have to find another area to sleep in to make their own colonies, which should match certain criteria. Of course, you can
Right.
choose not to be picky. In an ideal world, you would want to reduce the amount of stress by going out very long distances to hunt, and
Yeah.
then you would want things within your vicinity.
Yeah. Yeah. So is dispersal governed by colony size, if or if the roost place is large enough, do they then not disperse?
Probably yes. So okay, I would say yes and no. The reason is
Okay.
and the one part of the reason is that there are a lot of unknowns and there's not a lot of science to back this. So I have to use my
Right.
own judgment and ecology
Experience,
background
yes.
knowledge to make predictions. But if I take the example of bats like horseshoe and leaf-nosed bats, which are cave-dwelling bats. So they often form rather large colonies in caves, or even tomb bats or mouse-tailed bats, which live in caves in very large colonies. I I do believe that individuals probably do not feel pressured to disperse because the cave is large, the temperature is stable,
Right.
there's place for everyone. Of course, within the cave, there might be hierarchy about who occupies which part of the cave, but the fact is that you're still in the same geographical location. In some other species, like horseshoe bats and leaf-nosed bats, they often show a bit of movement from one cave to another. So either it's dependent on season, or sometimes it's also dependent on what they're doing at that point of the year. So a cave that they're using for just general sleeping may not be ideal for hibernation, and it may not be ideal for raising young ones. So they keep shifting caves, and if that is the situation, then the offspring has either two possibilities. Either they keep following the adults,
Right.
or they find out their own formula of what other
Right.
caves are in the vicinity. So yeah, answering from guesswork right now, but
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of science to back.
But yeah, really interesting. So we'll come back to this a bit later. I'm going to ask you about how bats forage, which again is going to be like so variable for all of them. But specifically for, say, the fruit eaters, they must be using some sort of a mental map, you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, I think fruit eating bats are there's a lot to study about them, and particularly in urban areas, and this is something that I tell in every school webinar that I do, that one of the easiest school biology projects is something you can do right from your terrace by looking at how the direction that flying foxes are flying in throughout the year. Because I suspect it changes quite a bit, and everything is
Right.
dependent on where they're going to find either water or food. And given that most of our cities are surrounded by orchards, and flying foxes are capable of flying a good 40-50 kilometers in one direction in one night.
Wow.
So they probably keep tracking orchards or keep tracking trees within the cities, and they have excellent mental maps of this. And there's actually a lot of science on smaller fruit bats, which very similar to the species that we have in India, which have very detailed mental maps, and juveniles learn it from the adults. So the mental map is very important for their survival. There was something else that I wanted to talk about, which now has skipped my mind, but yeah, maybe it will come back.
I was going to ask, do we know the rough territory sizes?
Again, depends on, they do. Now the problem here is that the roost is a part of the territory, and now once they've flown 50-60 kilometers away, they they really using the areas in between enough to be called a territory or not? We don't know. And once they've reached their destination, are they truly maintaining and defending a territory? Again, I am not very sure of. So this distinction between home range and territory here is a little blurred, because the bats are foraging. If you look at the area that they're occupying, it might be the whole city, but are there certain pockets in the city that they are choosing over others and are actively defending? I think we don't have enough studies from India to claim that.
Okay, but home range?
Home ranges for flying foxes can be very long. They can be, like I said, at least 60 kilometers, 50, 60 kilometers in one direction, depending on the season. And so we're essentially looking at a good 30, at least a 30, 40 kilometer radius around the roost. And for the smaller bats, it's much smaller. Like the short-nosed fruit bat would be about 4, 5, 10 kilometers. And again, another interesting thing is how this varies in an urban area versus a rural area, because urban areas they're cultivated with so many fruiting trees, so many avenue trees that end up bearing fruits for bats. So they probably don't have to travel as far as they do in rural areas. And actually, that brings me to the point that I forgot. Another very interesting
nice.
thing that's happening in India these days is when fruit shops are open at night, short-nosed fruit bats in many places have become bold enough to go to fruit shops and pick bananas. So again, that's
Wow.
another thing to factor in, that probably because of this new opportunity for them, their home range sizes have either shrunken or increased.
Yeah, sorry, Srini, I think you have a question.
Yeah, it was, I think, related to something Rohit was saying on. He said this simple science experiment everybody can do, that which direction they're flying in.
Yeah. So because say assume I have a flying fox colony living near my house, and flying foxes are these big, very big bats that we all know. So if I stand at my terrace, maybe in this season I will see them flying northwards, but in another season, maybe I'll see them flying westwards. And all of this is governed by, if mangoes are blooming on towards the north, then they would go towards the mangoes in this season. But say some monsoon fruit is flowering in the west, then they go into the west. So it's determined by
Seasons, the different thing fruiting is happening. Oh wow. Yeah, I think I've seen Bombay. They've just keep this huge looking bats are stunningly flying all over the sky. Yeah. Goa also, there's like pretty large bats are here.
Same species,
This much? Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the ones called flying foxes.
Awesome.
So who are the main predators for bats?
When they are, again, two different examples. We'll take flying foxes as one example and the smaller bats as another example. The smaller bats, I think they're very vulnerable when they're roosting. So if any predator has found a roost, for example, a cave where there are thousands of bats, even during the day, in caves, I've seen animals like jungle cats, civets go in and try to hunt bats. Owls as well. In one particular case, there was a mottled wood owl constantly coming inside a cave to hunt bats.
Wow.
A lot of other predators waste outside the cave at dusk when bats start flying out, and then they keep catching them. Snakes as well. In the Andaman Islands, where I did my master's thesis, there was a snake called the red-tailed trinket, which herpetologists had quite a bit of trouble finding, but I kept running into them in caves all the time.
Oh,
Because
nice.
they were going after bats. So in the cave, bats can be quite vulnerable. With flying foxes, I think their only natural predators happen to be large birds of prey and owls. And an interesting anecdote, I think, which is not quantified, but it's an interesting hypothesis to test. Flying foxes usually tend to roost near people. Even if you will rarely ever find their colonies in dense forests, they're always found around villages or around cities. And my hunch is, of course, there's also food in such places, but I think another hypothesis could be that they're trying to avoid predators, because around people is where these large birds of prey are usually absent. Yeah, so flying foxes typically don't have a lot of natural predators, but what they do have, and where they do die in large numbers, is because of heat waves, which are increasing in their intensity. So I think, what started as being a natural way of controlling their populations is now going out of hand because of climate change.
So that brings us to the roost site itself. What makes for a good roost site?
I think just what makes for a good house to rent. You want
Right.
safety, you want availability of water, you want grocery stores around you, which in the case of bats are good feeding grounds. And yeah, I think these three factors are the key. But also, given that bats don't have fans and ACs, the roost itself should have some climate control. And yeah, depends on again on the species. Some species are not as picky about microclimate as certain other species are. And then again, if we are looking at a bat that's in a relatively temperate area like the Himalayas, where it wants to sleep, where like just sleep generally for half of the year, but hibernate for around 3 to 4 months of the year, then it needs to have easy access to different caves that offer different climatic conditions.
And you said they have a rich social life at the roost site. Can they avoid predators while they're at the roost site? Can they do anything about it?
They can, again, depends on what the predator is, but thankfully bats are blessed with flight, which means that they can
fly away.
if a snake is here and trying to catch them, if the bat has escaped, then the snake has one full day to get to it. But
Right.
the problem is that an individual can save itself, but in a colony where thousands of individuals or even millions of individuals are roosting at times, then the snake or any predator has very high chances of catching one. Yeah, so I think again, maybe in the cave itself, certain dominant individuals are probably choosing places that
Safer
are
places.
protected from predators and where they can maintain a more active and thriving social life than the other subordinates.
Yeah. And do they have like family units or something that they sleep in?
Again, I don't know whether bats that form large colonies in caves, how their units are organized. Are they constantly roosting next to particular individuals? And if they are those particular individuals, their own kin or not their kin? These are things that are yet to be tested. But with the short-nosed fruit bat, of course, we know that they roost in harems. So the male knows and mates with multiple females. I think the best example of this is our vampire bats from South America. So I'm jumping from India, I'm taking a massive jump from India, but it's a very interesting example to plug because vampire bats we know have colonies that are, if I'm not wrong, they are also made of kins, but also non-kin. And the interesting thing here is that they maintain quite close-knit social units, and these are bats that are going out and drinking blood. They don't drink human blood, but they drink blood from deer, pig, horses, birds, etc. And but blood is hard to find. There's so many animals, but the chance that you'll wake an animal up and not get your meal is quite high. So the chance of starvation is quite high in vampire bat colonies. And when a starving individual comes back to the roost, at least one other roost member will donate blood to it by vomiting blood out. And again, this is not a completely altruistic activity. It depends on a lot of factors, and it also depends on memory of who's donating. And if I donated blood to you today, if you don't donate to me tomorrow, I will stop donating to you. So there's a lot of reciprocity that has to be maintained. But the fact of the matter is that there's this act of what I'm calling kindness right now. And there's also that helps maintain a close-knit social unit.
Yeah, and a very complex social unit.
Yeah.
And they have to keep track of the complexity of it and keep track of who is an honest friend and who cheats. We know that the smaller bats are using echolocation much more than the fruit bats are, right? Do fruit bats use any echolocation?
We know that certain fruit-eating bats, like a species called the fulvous fruit bat, which is also found in India, again, a very common species. If you go to one of the monuments in Delhi, particularly Agrasen Ki Baoli, which is in the middle of the city, that has a big colony of fulvous fruit bats. These are fruit bats that live inside caves, and in the darkness of the cave, in order to navigate, they produce tongue clicks, which is a very primitive form of echolocation. In fact, even blind people can be trained to use tongue clicks to navigate. So that's what these fruit bats do. But except for them, all other fruit bats that are not living inside caves, they do not echolocate. They completely rely on their sense of smell, their vision. In fact, they're known to have pretty good color vision as well. So they rely on their smell and vision and their mental map to navigate, while insectivorous bats are the ones that are echolocating.
Okay. Yeah, so echolocation is this super cool sense which you've used to also see them, find them, and look at them. What are so? What would you say is that is the primary sense? Would you say?
Hard to tell because that's the sense that is definitely most widely studied because finally we've cracked how to study it. We have pretty good technology to study it and now pretty cheap technology to record bat calls as well. But a lot of researchers do believe that their sense of smell might be equally important, particularly maybe for social bats
Yeah,
that form
that's what I was
smaller.
going to ask you.
Yeah. So these are studies in progress, and unfortunately, again, I will have to fall back on predictions based on ecological principles rather than pulling a study out. Yeah. So I would say that other senses are probably equally important. It's just that we haven't been able to crack their
Yeah,
importance.
especially because if it's such a social animal
Yeah.
living in close proximity, I'm guessing tactile senses or other things will help recognize individuals and all of that.
Yeah, so actually, oh yeah, so the examples that do come to my mind are again tomb bats, and there are certain others. There's a closely related species of the same family in Central America, which is very well studied. But tomb bats, again, in India, we know that the moment you enter a tomb bat roost, with some practice, you will learn to recognize that bat simply from its smell because they have glands that produce a musky odor. And again, it's the male that's doing that. Clear indication that they're using this for communication, for maybe for sexual signaling. And yeah, but just exactly how it is used is yet to be known.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. So moving on from the natural history of bats to the spaces that they inhabit. So we've spoken briefly about the roost characteristics. Close to human habitation, what are the spaces that they're inhabiting? You already mentioned archaeological sites, especially stepwells, because they're good thermoregulated places. Where else are they staying?
Everywhere. I would say almost everywhere. Like I know this bat, right? I haven't seen that bat right
Right.
outside my window here. Every evening, we happen to have the apartment swimming pool is right under our window. So the first thing that I see at dusk is this bat coming out, taking a couple of circles, going down to the swimming pool to drink water, and then it flies off. Where is it living? I don't really know, but it is definitely living somewhere above on the same wall, maybe on a crevice, maybe behind a pipeline. For example, once I was in Pune, one of my friends who's a very good naturalist this is Ferguson College in Pune, very old British era building, stone building. We were walking through the corridors of this building, and then suddenly this friend of mine, people are walking around, there's students walking around, it's a happening campus. And this friend of mine just stops and says there are bats here. I said, where? We were standing facing a notice board and where you would clearly not expect bats, but once your eyes go down, you see a lot of droppings under the notice board. So, the bats are
Right.
pooping, they're right behind the notice board. So they can be everywhere. So starting from notice board in a buzzing college corridor to palm trees, which is what short-nosed fruit bats seem to like because short-nosed fruit bats, they make tents out of palm leaves. So the males bite the leaves in such a manner that the leaves fold and then they give the darkness required for roosting. And females probably also select males based on how good a tent they can make. So that's a rather specific kind of roosting scenario. Flying foxes seem to love old trees, particularly banyans and peepals, where people probably also worship these trees. So the chance of people causing any disturbance to those trees is minimal. In Nagpur, where I grew up, I've seen this roost on a banyan tree for the last 30 years since my kindergarten days. And so they seem to maintain traditional roosts where they've been living for generations.
So you've mentioned them living in buildings. When there are no buildings, would they be occupying like tree cavities or tree cavities?
Yes, tree cavities are the natural alternative for crevices.
So do you think the numbers are going up in and around cities?
I suspect so. I think again, this is a study that we tried doing, we've done in Bangalore, but we're yet to analyze the data properly. But there seem to be certain species that probably are benefiting if you compare their activity and the amount of hunting incidents, which you can often measure that through their ultrasonic calls. They're probably more active and more and capable of hunting more certain species in cities as opposed to surrounding rural areas. So there's quite a bit of chance that certain species like
Certain
the
species.
least pipistrelle, for example, is becoming more and more common in cities. And another thing probably worth studying is this is increasing urbanization. For example, in in mountain ranges, cities are going up, cities or townships are going upwards. Are they
Yes.
helping bats increase their elevational distribution as well? We don't really have an answer, but I suspect it does. So that is one part of the answer. The other part of the answer, which I don't have a proper, I mean, it's more of a question than an answer, is are cities then becoming ecological traps for bats? I don't really know. Of course, they're
But
coming into cities, but is it causing them any kind of harm?
but this also, I think, brings to mind a really important point that, like in birds, there are commensal species, right? So there are common menas and parakeets, which thrive around human habitation, but then will drive out shyer species, right?
Yeah,
And which are probably like the data deficient and the threatened species. And I'm sure the same is happening with bats, right?
absolutely. I think it is.
And if you like cities going up into the hills, the mountains are where the more threatened species of bats are anyway. And now they have to compete with these commensal species. And we might think at first glance that it's great that bats are doing well, but they're probably not doing that well.
Absolutely. Yeah. In ecology, it's always one species benefiting will always come at the loss
Yes.
of the species.
Is there a
Benefit.
particular species that you know of whose numbers are reducing?
The most commensal species in bats tend to belong to the genus called Pipistrellus. So they're commonly called pipistrelles, but there are multiple species of pipistrelles even in cities. They tend to be the most commensal. Of course, there are certain species of pipistrelles that are less commensal than others. But the least pipistrelle, for example, or the Indian pygmy bat, which is one of the smallest bats found in India, seems to be doing pretty well in cities. And in the Himalayas where I've worked, there's another species of pipistrelle, which I, at least from my capture data, seems to be more common around people, but as you go into forest, you rarely ever catch this species. So probably in these edges is where maybe a lot of competition is happening between the forest dwelling species and these dominant commensal species that are very adaptable.
What's a forest species? I don't know any.
Quite a few, but in peninsular India, they would mostly be horseshoe bats are quite forest adapted. Of course, certain species are a bit more generalist, but most species of horseshoe bats tend to live in forest. There are certain other species called tube nose bats. They're very big, very cool bats where the nostrils sort of bifurcate like this in a tube-like structure. So tube nose bats are very strongly adapted to forests. In fact, their echolocation calls are also adapted to very densely cluttered environments. So
Right.
that is a classic example of a forest dwelling bat.
Okay. So we know of diseases that come from bats and how much that's been in the news.
Yeah.
I think that is most people's first thought when they know that there's a bat living near them. And it's only gotten worse with WhatsApp forwards and all of that. Is that what you find as well? Is that people's first reaction to knowledge of bats?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, now I wish for the days when people would start thinking about superstitions or about bats that they fly into your hair, they suck your blood and all of that, because those were somehow less harmful than the perception that COVID has created in people's mind.
Yeah.
And so diseases post-COVID, definitely diseases are the first thing that comes to people's mind. And yeah, and this is going to be a long conversation, but we can break it down one by one with questions.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, the first thing that, one thing that whenever the point of topic about diseases comes up, and we've clearly seen that bats are not animals that are restricted to forests. Bats are very much animals of the city, very much animals of our immediate vicinity. When you talk to disease ecologists, and disease ecologists I really don't have any problem with them. They are doing very important work, but a lot of them do not know bat natural history sufficiently, and they always end up making this mistake of saying that all diseases are coming from the forest. We are the ones chopping down trees. We are, well, that there is a lot of truth to it, to be honest. But what it ignores is the fact that bats live right next to us. This bat which swoops down to the swimming pool is somewhere within 10 meters away from me. So what disease ecologists do not remind the general public is that these animals have been living very close to us, and yet the chances of diseases, we've not seen many outbreaks considering how closely we've lived with bats for centuries. Clearly, there are areas where the barrier between bats and humans has been broken, where something has been compromised, and those are the things that we need to focus on. And there are great examples of epidemiological research that has identified these barriers, and it has led to proper mitigation measures which have controlled diseases. Of course, people's acceptance remains questionable often, but it's absolutely possible to find where these diseases are coming out of and design interventions surrounding those.
Do you have an example in mind?
Yeah, so the classic example for this is Bangladesh, where there were subsequent outbreaks of Nipah virus. And now what was happening there is during the winters, date palm sap and date palm jaggery is a delicacy in Bangladesh, West Bengal, etc. So on the palm trees, people make incisions and then they put a collecting bowl under the incision to collect the sap. And it so happened that flying foxes and other fruit bats were coming and drinking the sap directly. And saliva is a major contaminant. Saliva, we've, I mean, that's how common cold spreads, that's how everything spreads. This is a bat-borne virus directly contaminating a substance meant for consumption. So that was a recipe for disaster. And it took a while for epidemiologists to find that. Once they found that, there were very simple alternatives. One, boil the date palm sap before consuming it. Two, if that is absolutely not possible, put a physical barrier surrounding the date palm, the collection bowl. And and these are very simple examples. Of course, I'm not trying to trivialize this. In India, for example, in Kerala, so many epidemiological surveys have yet to find the answer to why Nipah keeps breaking out in Kerala. It's a complex situation, but there still are certain simple ways in which we can we can coexist with bats like we've been doing for the last so many centuries. Some simple examples, some simple basic hygiene rules to follow are to stay away from their roost as much as possible. Don't go right under a bat roost. Don't get soaked in their feces. Stay away from it. Try to wear a mask when you're close to, actually not just bat, whenever you're close to any animal for that matter, in a closed space, try to wear a mask, because it's not just about you protecting yourself from the animal, but also protecting the animal from the diseases that you might transmit to it. Washing your hands, not eating fallen fruits, particularly with bite marks, because it's the same situation as Nipah. It's saliva that's contaminating, you're consuming it. So all of these simple protocols, if you follow, I think people have a very good chance of coexisting healthily with bats.
The problems of coexistence with them are, one is hygiene and diseases that might come from there. And I guess one would be the loss to fruit crop that they do.
Yeah.
Is there any other problem with coexisting with bats?
Also, nuisance, often noise, and that is a big complaint that we receive with flying fox colonies. And again, the flying foxes, unfortunately, everywhere. Cities are expanding around them. That one banyan tree might be left as is, but if the city expands around it, obviously they've been pooping there all through their lives, and then they continue pooping on people's houses now. So that creates a lot of problems. And unfortunately, there is no solution to that. Or there is a solution to it. It's just that every place will have to have its own solution. But all these solutions that people keep pitching for, that we'll burst crackers, we'll put acoustic deterrents and so on, these are all band-aid solutions. The bats will be away today, they'll come back 10 days later. So yeah, and with fruit crops, that's a major concern again. And again, every farmland will have to come up with its own solution. But particularly grapes, which grow on vines, those can at least be physically covered. Something that I've heard being done in Australia, where they also have flying foxes and a lot of problems with flying foxes, is that a lot of farmers pluck their fruits before they are fully ripened. Because once they're fully ripened is when the bats come. But once you pluck them before they're ripened and allow them to ripen after being plucked, there's the chance of conflict decreases. So again, there are solutions, but we need to be able to study each of these cases independently and come up with site-specific measures.
No major problems with pipistrels?
Not so much, because the good thing is that they are hardly ever seen. That they can be in your house. You don't come to know that they are in your house until the breeding season comes, and then suddenly one pup has fallen down. But typically with pipistrels, people don't report a lot of problems because A, they are always hidden. Two, they form very small colonies. Like in Nagpur, in our house, we have a colony of about 7 individuals. In the breeding season, it's gone up to 13 individuals. They do poop, but thankfully it's in a part of the staircase that we don't really use that much. So the bats are happy, we are happy. And in most situations, yeah, they don't cause a lot of trouble because of their small colonies and their hiding areas.
And they don't mind you walking around?
Not a lot, no, not at all. They get used to it. In fact, bringing back that Ferguson College example, thousands of people are walking through that corridor every day, but the pipistrels are happily sleeping behind their notice board.
So these are the problems of living with bats, but what are the advantages of living with bats?
Plenty. I think the biggest advantage is the number of insects that they consume. And at that point of the night, there is not much eating. No other animal eats mosquitoes as effectively as bats do. Of course, that's not to say that bats eat a lot of mosquitoes. They're small. Mosquitoes are small, so they're at best and like a pan, an afternoon after meal pan for a bat. So they're not giving any nutritional benefits, but there's nothing else that's hunting mosquitoes at that time of the night. So mosquitoes, apart from that, bats are known to consume a lot of pest insects. And by pest insects, I not only mean disease-causing vectors like mosquitoes, but also insects that damage rice fields, corn fields, which may not be in the immediate vicinity of the city, but these bats that are living in the city also do go out and hunt insects in those areas. And that's something that we're trying to study in Delhi, where bats are living inside monuments right in the middle of the city, but they're getting conserved because of the monuments, but in return, they're probably keeping the whole city safe by consuming pest insects all over the city. And also insects that cause diseases to livestock, those have also been reported from the diet of bats. So it's not just direct human health benefits, there are economic benefits because bats are eating insects that damage our crops, but they're also eating insects that damage our livestock, on which both our economy and our health are dependent. So that's about insectivore bats. Now about fruit eating bats, they disperse seeds, they pollinate flowers, and of course within the city, I don't know what benefit they're creating to the urban environment, but the fact that they're doing a better job of keeping the greenery intact than we are in the urban area.
That's true. I heard of these instances where somebody in the US, I'm guessing like 100 years ago, tried to bring back bats to fight malaria.
Oh, okay.
Do you know of this? They tried making these large roosts to attract bats
Oh, okay. Yeah.
as a natural control for mosquitoes.
Yeah. Until you mentioned the large roost, it seemed like a very American thing to do. But no, but the large roost is a smart thing to do, which is contrary to doing an American thing.
Yeah. Is it possible
Okay,
to attract bats
Uh,
making these structures?
Yes, so in Europe and North America, where large colonies of bats have been decimated because of urban expansion and industrial scale habitat fragmentation, bat boxes are turning out to be quite innovative ways to bring bats back. And depending on the species that you're targeting, you can either design a very big roost because certain species are gregarious and they like to live in large colonies, or you can put very small, like the bird nest boxes that we put, a slightly modified design of that can also be put to attract smaller non-colonial species. And yeah, so again, so these are, yeah, and that was a pretty successful example where I think there was growing not just the idea of bringing bats back, but also trying to keep them away from roosting in houses and such places, because the general level of tolerance towards wildlife is a lot lower in Western countries than here. So they really want to have the segregation of humans and animals. So that turned out to be a great example and a win-win situation for. I think they've tried it in a couple of places, in many places in the United States, actually. But in India, we are contemplating that idea, especially for conflict situations like bats living in monuments, because that is they are living in monuments, but they probably also are damaging the monument because of their dropping, because of their urine, their saliva, etc. Such a situation might require this kind of an intervention. But in the cities, by and large, bats are finding their own innovative ways to make use of the urban space and live conveniently in cities.
But it's possible to attract more if you want.
It is, but it also requires a good understanding of the species ecology.
Like it has to see the roost and then the roost and then
Uh,
take it up, right?
and it depends on what species and the design. And another problem that often happens in tropical areas is that the bat houses tend to heat up quite a bit. So then,
Yeah,
so
yes.
even if they occupy it, then they leave it after some time.
Yeah. You won't know the thermoregulation as well as a bat would. Yeah. So that kind of brings me towards the end. Is Srini will ask his one question now. And in case there's anything else that you had in mind that you wanted to share, but you missed or I haven't asked, you can also do that.
No, I think I gave very long and convoluted answers. I yapped too much today.
No, that was wonderful. Srini, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Rohit, for it was very fascinating to learn about this. I mean, it's almost like it's little, how we are filled with fears about certain things. So just to demystify that is like really nice. Actually, some of them look very cute. And I don't know, now it's so many AI
Most
images.
of them look very cute.
Very cute, exactly. And very distinctive. They have these, I don't know, very ancient features also and all. But now there's so many AI images also. I'm like, this one which doesn't look real. It's just this white bat looks perfectly cute. I mean, something you will just pet it, So what we were leading to is that also. So we've been speaking to different people studying different animals and different species, multi-species. So the point being also that we're trying to gather different knowledges coming out. And so something what we wanted to learn in each thing is that is there something sort of a recipe for multi-species living, right? How do we live with all these people? So maybe that's kind of be the entry point for many of these conversations is that how do we think about a multi-species existence, right?
Yeah.
Because not every species is balanced. Everything has its own idiosyncrasies. Something is good, something is not bad, all these things. But is there something you felt, first of all, why did you start this interest in bats? Why were you fascinated by them? And what is this kind of recipe? What is in it for us, maybe? Yeah.
The way I got interested in bats was actually in the city. We rescued bats a bat that was injured because it got entangled in a kite flying thread. So that was my first interaction with a bat. Then that same year, a bat flew into my dustbin. And this was
Oh.
a short-nosed fruit bat because there were rotting bananas in the dustbin. So the bat just flew in and got trapped there.
Oh no.
So those were instances where
Uh-huh.
I was lucky enough to see this animal that
Uh-huh.
even in my childhood and my growing up days, I had never heard anything good about. So it wasn't an animal that I was programmed to, I was conditioned to. When I saw it, I realized that this animal really doesn't seem capable of doing any harm. And then I handled the animals, the rescued individual, we fed it bananas, we fed mangoes. And the way it was taking everything in without showing any discomfort was very endearing. And I think that's where most people tend to, and that is the reason why I say I was lucky enough to see this animal in that condition, because most people are not lucky enough to do that. Maybe they don't consider themselves unlucky, but I definitely do, because you need to see this animal properly before framing an opinion about it.
Yes.
And the moment you see a bat, you realize just what I realized. And most of these myths that come up about bats, you see that pattern repeating with owls. So these are all nocturnal animals, all animals that we don't usually see, and that allows our mind to do the job, which is imagine everything negative about these animals. But when you see these animals, you become more, you embrace the animal for what it is. So now coming to the recipe, a part of it is being open and embracing these animals for what they are. They do not fit the stereotype of a man's best friend like a dog does. A lot of bats do have very large and beady eyes, and they can be tamed very well to perform certain tasks. Whether you can expect companionship from them is a different story, but they can do all of that. The second recipe is, something I, well, maybe philosophical, maybe not, maybe political even, is just embracing diversity. It's something we are very bad at doing, getting worse by the day. But just by embracing diversity, I don't just mean the diversity of species around us. It's actually easy to live with, because that you see a diversity of shapes and sizes, and you're automatically in awe of that diversity. But also being more open to understanding why these animals behave in a certain way. So
Correct.
if this animal is living in my house, why is it living in my house? What can I do to let it live in my house while maintaining a decorum? So probably putting a slab of wood slightly on top of the wood, on top of the wall, so that the droppings don't fall to the ground.
Correct.
Maybe trying to put a bat house if that is absolutely necessary. So these are the kind of things, like not being, and that is where a lot of people make this mistake, that every time they have a problem, I do get a lot of complaints from people. Unfortunately, being on social media means that you get to hear a lot of complaints from people saying that, oh, there's a bat in my house, what do I do? I think first thing is try to live with it. If there is a serious problem, then unfortunately, I will need to know a bit more about the situation to help you. But yeah, a lot of people don't make that effort to live with the animals that are in diversity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that embracing diversity, yeah, I mean, for me, it felt also very spiritual in a way that, from the perspective that, like, for example, anywhere you go in India, there's this bad habit that any snake they see, they'll just kill it. Poisonous, non-venomous, nothing. It's just the instinct is to kill it. I'm like, why are you killing that thing? Is just, no, they just kill it, and anything. So there's this some hatred or fear of certain species that has been, like, over the years gone into. As a result, like bats, snakes, all these suffer much more than a regular something or whatever, right? So that's where I feel that embracing diversity of let them live sort of thing is for nice recipes that understand that there's a place for them. I feel that's a very nice demystification of that. I feel also. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I think that's very nice.
I want to question you on what you said last, which is make an effort to live with them. What do you mean by that?
Okay, again.
Yeah, like somebody who has no clue, what is this effort that you would suggest they make?
Again, I'm speaking from a point of privilege because I've not had major troubles with bats. My If there were thousands of bats in my room right now, that would make this room quite inhospitable, whatever. But so speaking from a slight point of privilege, is that if a situation like that happens, definitely it needs an intervention. But I'm talking about slightly milder cases. For example, the pipistrelles living in my house, where there is quite a bit of dropping in a good season. In a good season like monsoon, when they breed, there is a lot of dropping on the staircase. It so happens that we don't use that staircase, but even if we did, we would probably, what I would think of is trying to put a slab of wood slightly above the ground, so that's where the droppings fall and do not dirty the house. Because otherwise there's not so much trouble. But so the point being that the mere sight of an animal that you have not grown up liking should not be reason enough to make you chase that animal away. And there always are solutions to these problems. They vary from place to place. But if you're going to call me to say that I spotted a bat, what do I do? I will ghost you. If you tell me that there is a bat, this is what is happening, this is the problem, or my parents are complaining, that is when I can try and give you a site-specific solution.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time and for talking to us. This was so wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm sorry if the answers were very convoluted, but yeah.